In this video series, I will provide perspective, historical fact, and critical analyses of the current political landscape that gave cause for the resurgence of the American government, as we are taking the needed steps to restore our lawful government here in America. I will present to you how it is being done. The Federation of States has secured and offers to you your rightful claim to your inheritance as an American. And we ask that you join your fellow American state nationals in the work of finishing the reconstruction of our constitutionally guaranteed Republican form of government. Welcome back, America and the world, to today's episode of the Resurgence Pulse Report. I am your host, Louise Campbell Anthony, here with the Peacekeeping Task Force for the Federation of States, that is, the United States of America Unincorporated. I'm going to set the perspective for this episode with reading a passage from a book that I happened to just pick up off the shelf one day in an Airbnb that I was vacationing at over the Thanksgiving holiday in North Carolina. This book is titled The Beard's Basic History of the United States. Now, this book was copyrighted in 1944, and the page that caught my attention was page 180. Expansion to the Pacific. Now, the chapter started on page 179, and it started off with this statement. When independence was won, several eastern states had claims to territory in the region stretching westward to the Pacific, claims based on royal charters and colonial grants. But by 1786, they had all surrendered to the Union their rights to the territory north of the Ohio. In a short time, the territories south of the Ohio were separated from the seaboard claimants, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Thus, the western lands were cut loose from the overlordship of individual states, put into a national pool, and thrown open for settlement to immigrants from all parts of the seaboard region and also from the old world. Now, this is the section I want to bring your attention to. More than this, it was decided that settlers on the western lands were not to be held permanently under the dominance of the United States government. They were to be allowed, subject to certain rules, to form governments in their respective territories, draw up constitutions of their own, and at length, as states, join the Union as partners in every respect equal to the 13 original states. Thus, a promise of self-government preceded the Great Westward Migration. I was just sitting on my bed skimming through this book and happened upon this one passage, and it stopped me in my tracks. What I'm about to share with you in this episode will make crystal clear to you the relevance of this particular section in regards to the making of this nation. Let me restate it. I quote, "Western lands were not to be held permanently under the dominance of the United States government. They were to be allowed, subject to certain rules, to form governments in their respective territories, draw up constitutions of their own, and at length, as states, join the Union as partners in every respect equal to the 13 original states. Thus, a promise of self-government preceded the Great Westward Migration," unquote. That describes our American government, separate and apart from and superior to the United States government, our states of the Union. Our American government has been usurped by the United States government since 1861. During an illegal mercenary conflict we have been miseducated to refer to as the American Civil War. It wasn't a war at all, but a coup, military takeover. We have been under a military occupation, under a state of emergency by the territorial United States government all this time. But now, our American government was finally restored. Our job is to identify our mistakes of where our nation went wrong and lost the freedom that many died for, and to put into place a government structure that will be fortified against such a thing from happening again. Let's begin with our identity that has been stolen from us, which relinquished our freedom. Many people living here in America don't even know that our actual American government was missing in action for over a century, 137 years to be exact. Neither do they know that the Americans were missing too. Most of you don't know that the United States citizens run the United States government, and it takes American state citizens to run the American government. Put this way, you can clearly see the distinction and the logical association. We have United States nationals and United States citizens. We have American state nationals and American state citizens. These are four valid and distinct political statuses that you can hold here in America. In America, you are born a free and sovereign national, a national of the state you were born on, with no duty to serve the government as a citizen if you choose not to. Your political status was unlawfully converted from an American state national to a United States citizen way back when you were just born a baby by the U.S. military through one of its uniformed officers, who was either your gynecologist or your nurse, by his or her act of signing your birth certificate to certify that your parents have indeed relinquished your national status for a foreign United States citizen / subject status. What the American government has done since it has been restored back into operation and has called our states of the Union back into session in 2019, it has taken the United States government's naturalization process and applied it to reverse this foreign status and allow you to make your choice to divest yourself of this United States citizenship status and reclaim your birthright political status as an American state national. I introduced this document to you in a previous episode. It's called Declaration of Naturalization Act of July 1779. Let me give you a little history behind the historical precedents of this document and why our government requires that Americans place this declaration of your clear intent on the public record. Let me take you to this website. This website is called Maryland State Archives Guide to Government Records. This explains the historical precedents of the Declaration of Naturalization. It reads, Historical Background Information, Naturalization Records. During the colonial period, there were very few naturalizations except for settlers from the continent of Europe. English, Welsh, Irish, and Scottish settlers were all considered merely to have moved from one part of the empire to another. Naturalization requirements in English law before 1776 required the alien to be a Protestant, to have lived in the colony for 7 years, and to take an oath of allegiance to the king. Maryland changed the law in 1779. The revised law allowed anyone professing a belief in the Christian religion to become a naturalized citizen. Obviously, no oath of allegiance to the king was required. The text of the 1779 law was published in English, French, and German in the Maryland Gazette on April 4th, 1793. Let's take a look at the Gazette. Here's the Maryland Gazette, Thursday, April 4th, 1793, and it starts, State of Maryland, an act for naturalization passed July session 1779. This is a government newspaper. Now continuing on to some more historical background. After the Revolution, naturalizations took place in any U.S. district court or any court of record in the individual states. All proceedings were required to be recorded. Children under 16 acquired citizenship through the naturalization of their parents. Between 1855 and the Cable Act of 1922, a woman automatically became a citizen by either marrying a citizen or by the naturalization of her husband. Now, according to this historical precedent, these declarations had to be recorded as stated here, which is why the publishing and recording of our declaration is required today. According to Maryland's laws, continuing down here below, it says types of naturalization records. Declarations of intent were used by would-be citizens to renounce allegiance to foreign governments and to declare the intent of becoming a United States citizen. They usually preceded other documents by at least 2 years and may not have been required if a citizen had received an honorable discharge from the military or entered the country as a minor. Let's look at some examples of these declarations. The state of Maryland, City of Baltimore, to wit, Criminal Court of Baltimore, on April of 1853. Be it remembered that on the day of the date hereof, personally appears in the clerk's court of the Criminal Court of Baltimore, the man's name, a native of Hanover, and at present residing in the city of Baltimore, and made oath on the holy evangeli of Almighty God that it is bona fide his intention to become a citizen of the United States and to renounce forever all allegiance and fidelity to every foreign prince, potentate, state, and sovereignty, whatever, and particularly all allegiance and fidelity to the King of Hanover. Clerk signs it. And here's some other examples. Same wording, except different sovereign. This one has the King of Saxony. This one has the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And this last one has the same thing, the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland. Now today, our Declaration of the Naturalization Act of July 1779 accomplishes the same thing. You are renouncing your allegiance to the foreign territorial United States government under the British monarch King Charles III and declaring your intention of becoming an American state national, which internationally is referred to as a non-citizen United States national. Our declaration contains similar language and with quite a few added paragraphs to undo the false presumption that the United States government could possibly make about our intentions not being clear enough, that we are wanting to expatriate our allegiance, our labor, our property, and even our breath from the foreign citizenship obligations. If you do not declare this intention on the public record, then you are legally presumed to be a foreign U.S. citizen and not an American. We are back in the days of 1779. We don't know who the Americans are or who the foreigners are. We stand today as a fledgling new country once again. It only took one American to claim their heritage back before 1860 on the state where they live in order to claim back our state of the Union and our self-governance on your behalf. But that's not all it took to restore our American government. Some people ask, why go through the trouble of recording declarations if it was all fraud from the beginning, when fraud vitiates everything ab initio, from the beginning? Your answer? For one, because there is a recoupment of assets and restitution owed both to Americans and to U.S. citizens. If you don't identify yourself, you won't be able to claim what's yours. For two, there's a crime still in progress perpetrated against you to steal your identity, and many remain accomplices to this crime knowingly and willingly. Those people we need to identify, arrest, and bring to justice. To learn more about how all this fraud actually happened and how to claim what's yours and remove yourself from that list of accomplices, go to claimyourinheritance.info and watch that international public notice video on the home page. On November 17th, 2025, for the first time in 165 years, America is back in the hands of Americans who are operating as Americans. This was the day. Our country is seated. Our government is seated. The Americans are back home. We are now the government again. The Americans are in charge, not the United States government, which is the way it should be. That's the way it always should have been, except for our British subcontractors getting greedy 165 years ago. In the World Court, the United States government, by way of its commander-in-chief, Donald J. Trump, lost the argument before the International Court of Justice for failure to establish standing. He was not there representing us, Americans, or our American government. No, we had a representative, Chief Laverne Fasthorse was there with standing to represent the 525 native nations and our 50 nation states, because their nations don't have established physical borders and ours do. Our American government, as distinct from the US government, has lived at peace with the native peoples, and they are dual nationals of our nation states. Our blood treaties with them go back hundreds of years and is written in the DNA of their nations, from Nova Scotia to Mexico. That's why we declared joint sovereignty in 2015 and reissued our sovereign letters patent. More about this later. Now, this is a huge increase in responsibility for all of us, and it's going to require a lot of work out of a lot of people to educate themselves because they were not educated. It's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people on a lot of different levels to overcome and restore and revitalize the actual American government and culture, because we've been treated like British territorial Commonwealth entities for 160 plus years. Everything that you are used to in terms of government is theirs. It's their government. It's not our government. So we have to learn our own traditions, our own government, and our own law. We have to put everything back together the way it should be. Then finally, we can hope that we get to enjoy what our forefathers fought for, because the Brits have, by deceit and by guile, attempted to treat us as colonies, even though they had no right to do any of it. It's just been a criminal enterprise since the days of Lincoln. Now they have been caught, and the rest of the world community can see how they've operated a system of colonialism. They just switched jurisdictions. Let our fiduciary for the Federation of States, Anna Maria Reisinger, tell you about the historical significance of this day. Watch this.
Well, I want everybody to get out their calendars, and I want them to put a big, big, big red X on November 17th, 2025. And the reason I want you to do that is that for the first time in 160 years, America is back in the hands of Americans who are operating as Americans. Today is the day. Our country is seated, our government is seated, the Americans are back home, and we are all of the things, the terrible things that we've had to address and struggle with for so long are going away. So everyone, let this be a day in our national archives and our memory as a day when the Americans came home again. This is our homecoming day. And so you're going to see some magnificent changes. You're going to see the release of the technologies. You're going to see the erasure of debts. You're going to see freedom from taxation. You're going to see a vast simplification of law and the whole justice system. It's a whole new world. And this was the day. So you are hearing it first. You are among the very, very first people on this planet that know that this has happened. And it should be tidings of great joy that this has been accomplished with a true minimum of disruption of services, and no nuclear bombs, and relatively little rioting in the streets. And now this great good that has come to our country can spread throughout the world. We're kind of the starting place because we were used as the storefront and operating base, the pirate base, for these criminals, and everything, the records and everything were here. Okay, but so we follow the same sort of rationale. We need to get ourselves straightened out before we can help everybody else. And so that's why we're first. And so we are going to quickly and happily restore freedom and decency and common sense. And then we're going to open up the doors, and we'll be, as soon as possible, helping people from every country on earth that has been affected by this great fraud to recover and recoup and live and grow and be and thrive and have their own cultures and their own countries again, and to live in peace and freedom. That's the goal, is that we'll finally enjoy what we have thought we were fighting for on so many occasions. And so this is it, guys. It is signed, it's sealed, it's delivered. And we'll be opening up the Capitol in Philadelphia. The national capital will be fully restored. And yeah, it's going to be a whole adventure, and hopefully a very joyous adventure for everyone. We're already making plans for community meet and greets all across the country. We'll be kind of preparing everyone, getting everyone back in their natural status. I'll call it our natural status as living people and on the land and soil. And we'll be educating millions of Americans who simply don't know. And we'll be teaching a lot of history that people never got in school. We'll be introducing school programs. We're just I can't even express the feeling right now at this moment. It's somewhere between wanting to break down and cry and out of just sheer gladness and relief, and great God Almighty, it's done. Oh glory. This is amazing. I mean, we've been working toward this very steadily for many years, and when you have a project of this magnitude, when you are beset on every side and somehow get through to the end, it's very humbling and very very joyous moment, but it's almost a solemn feeling too, where you think of all the people that have lived and died in chains and never knew, and all of the patriots over the years who sacrificed and went to prison and lost their homes and suffered discord in their families over this. But we are free, and we are in control of our own destiny again. And all of our resources, the assets of the country, are safe. They're no longer commandeered by foreign interests. And from here on, it's a whole new story. It's the story that we began with in 1776, and it's the story that we have opening up before us here in 2025.
What is this America she speaks of from 1776, celebrating its 250th year anniversary this year? If you ask that question to most of the people on the streets of America today, they will get the answer wrong. I'm going to explain a little of that story that we began with in 1776. Why is that important? Because we are now faced with an opportunity to do things a little bit differently, in a way that could prevent what has happened here in America to not happen again. What do you know, or should you know, about the 13 colonies? What our history books tell us distorts the truth. Look at this map. This map of English, French, and Spanish settlements to 1776, it says that the original 13 colonies was land claimed by England by 1750. However, our Federation's researchers tell us a different story. They were not actually a colony in the sense that people normally assume. Virginia was a joint venture of English investors who had been apportioned a charter to inhabit and develop resources in America. They were all very different, not just in location, but in derivation. Some of the colonies were established by England, New England and Virginia, for example, and were funded in the early days by the British investment companies, New England Company, Virginia Company, etc. Others were funded by other European monarchies and their investment companies, like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, for example, were not funded or financed by England. Catholic Delaware and Maryland stood cheek and jowl with the Protestant Virginia colony. This should give everyone a clue that when the American colonies stood up together and acted in one accord as Americans, it was not, as the popular historians would have you believe, a matter of united America standing against the British. It was a matter of colonies of various European nations breaking away from the domination of Europe. And in the case of Maryland and Delaware, breaking away from the control of the Pope. Back then, the political climate that gave birth to our nation's government was enthralled with constant war among the European monarchs trying to expand their empires. Some historians actually refer to this period as our First World War. For every war happening on American soil, it was an extension of the one happening across the waters in Europe or elsewhere, waged by those same monarchs. Nothing like it had ever been seen in the history of the world. No colony had ever broken free of the grip of the sponsoring nation. And here you had 13 of them, all going for broke and repudiating the claims of the assorted European monarchs and the Pope together at once. As such, the American Revolution was a revolution of thought, a new idea. And that idea was that men have the right of free will and self-determination given them by their creator, and no man, no monarch, no pope has the right to dictate another's conscience, lay claim to his body or his land or his assets, or otherwise inflict taxes and injuries or require payments for services rendered without his consent. It wasn't just the King of England being given a send-up. It was the King of France, the King of the Netherlands, the King of Denmark, the King of Spain, all the European monarchs, and the Pope being given their walking papers. Ironically, though, between a third and a half of the European royals were free thinkers and wished to be free themselves of the burden of managing other people's lives and dictating their beliefs and herding them around like animals. We had such a free thinker in the sovereign William Belcher, who agreed to serve as head of state for this fledgling new country. When William Belcher, or William Belcher in the English transliteration, took on the role and responsibility of being head of state, he clearly understood and agreed that this was an office he was serving in order to get this country recognized and enabled to do business in international trade. The monarchist wouldn't do business with this new country otherwise. William Belcher became head of state by victor in war. Our fledgling new country had to enter a sovereign in order to sell its ships in trade and commerce, had to define its relationship among all the other sovereigns, including George III. So the Belchers already owned their own coat of arms as sovereigns. They were sovereigns in England and became sovereigns in America. So their arms became the basis for the Great Seals. However, obviously, it was not William Belcher's intent to promote any monarchy, including his. So he became head of state, a hereditary guardian of the freedom and sovereignty of the American people. William Belcher was the clan chief in 1783, and a sovereign in his own right by virtue of the sovereignty granted to his forebears by William the Conqueror, and the sovereignty of the men of his clan, other men who had the same sovereignty bequeathed to them. They are all Normans in descent, French, not English. So how would William Belcher bequeath his sovereignty to Americans? Well, in the same exact way that William the Conqueror bequeathed his sovereignty and shared it among his barons. William Belcher was the only sovereign in the Continental Army, and the Continental Army conquered. So it was the victor by force of arms, the same exact situation as the Norman conquest. The only situational difference was that William Belcher made the grant of sovereignty even more generously. For it was not just to the nobles and great men with family names and lands of their own under the feudal system, but every noble and great shoemaker, tailor, sailor, and baker who took up arms in the name of freedom. He gave sovereignty directly to every member of the Continental Army and their progeny. And mindful of that sovereignty, the sons of the Revolution and the daughters of the Revolution have guarded it carefully. But even more than that, he gave sovereignty to all those who came after, all those who are born on the land and soil of this country forevermore. Share in the sovereignty of William Belcher and the sovereignty of William the Conqueror. You never even knew that such an office or responsibility existed, but he and his family were here nonetheless, and in this present moment came forward to do exactly what they were supposed to do when the sovereignty of this country is threatened by traitors who would open the borders and destroy the well-earned claim of the people of this country to hold this land as sovereigns in their own right. So he used his royal ensigns as a king in his own right, his national coat of arms as the basis to issue the great seals of both the United States and the United States of America. You can see this for yourself simply by looking up the coat of arms being used by the Belchers or Belchers at this time in history. It doesn't mean, obviously, that a Norman king who conferred sovereignty on all Americans was a monarchist himself, nor does it imply that any of his progeny are monarchists either. It is the simple fact that William Belcher had a superior form of sovereignty to the kings of England, who as heirs of John Lackland were kings of the Commonwealth. When he stepped onto the stage, the monarchists were beaten at their own game, and they still are. So long as the Belchers maintains the office of the head of state, even according to their own rules and traditions, the monarchists must recognize the sovereignty of our states and our people, which has been bequeathed to us under the settlement of the Norman conquest. The kings of the Commonwealth and their elitist supporters have tried many ways to undermine these basic facts, most recently by upending and leaving the land in the land law by going to the sea. But at the end of the day, they are still at sea, and their equity law, which they have used as a spearhead to try to overcome our lawful claims on the land, is not recognized nor practiced by any judicial court of American common law here in America. So all these other groups claiming to have standing or provenance to be America's government or interim government must learn this fact of how our nation became recognized as free and independent states. Though his family acquired sovereignty in England as a result of the Norman conquest, William Belcher, like his own forefathers, believed that people should learn to be self-governing. The Belchers are still the protectors of the Federation on the sea and in the air. The members of the Federation are the states of the Union, and your state assemblies are the embodiment of your states of the Union when in session. Thus, the Belchers act to protect the interests of the states and people, and keep the Federation alive, even if only by a skeleton crew, when the states are not in session, and they have summoned the states to assemble and take care of business and deal with the mess. Americans were given a great gift by William Belcher, who did not seek to rule over them, but who, much to the consternation of the other players, set Americans free, even as William the Conqueror set his own ancestors free of feudal bondage. The struggle that we are engaged in is basically a struggle between those who want a system of feudalism under a king and those who want a system that honors the natural and unalienable rights of every man, woman, and child. The Belchers already and long ago came down on the side of the natural and unalienable rights and paid with their blood for it. William Belcher continued to serve his country in that capacity until he died, and he taught his children the history and instilled in them a sense of duty that has lasted over 200 years, and which brought James Clinton Belcher forward to serve in this hour of need. And now, since his recent passing, the mantle has passed on to his son, Eric John Belcher. So wake up, America. You are engaged in a battle of wits against ruthless adversaries who wish to promote a new form of feudalism, commercial feudalism, and they aim to make you all into serfs and slaves, already far worse off than any counterparts in the Middle Ages. Now that you know the history, you have an equal share in advancing your own claim as sovereigns in your own right, to own your land and soil outright, your water, your air, to be free to chart your destiny and to be secure in your homes and property. Sovereignty in one's own right does not allow us to be lawless or disrespectful of the equal rights of others. It does not confer any supremacy over the common law and contracts, but it does mean that we are all free of all feudal allegiance, free of any presumption of involuntary servitude, and free of any obligation we do not knowingly, willingly, with full disclosure and understanding agree to. So now you have some key information that has been missing, perhaps from your education on these subjects. Now let's move on to some more missing key information that gets to the crux of the matter. By 1720, the Incorporation Craze that gripped England and Scotland, a craze created by the members of the Temple Bar and newly organized private insurance companies, had spread to America. The opportunity for investors to receive public bankruptcy protection was pitched without the full disclosure that such incorporation transferred ownership interests to the government and the king or queen. It inspired a series of mergers and structural changes among investor groups. The United States of America Trading Company, a rather obscure investor group in Kentucky, howbeit with support from George Washington and other rich Virginia planters, split in 1732 along class and origin line, with British investors forming the United States of America Incorporated, a British Crown corporation. Remember this one I talked about in episode 1? And the more conservative American investors continuing to operate as the United States of America Trading Company, an unincorporated American business venture. This one is the one I now work for, our Federation of States. This is how the unincorporated side developed during the war. The United States of America represented the Federation of 13 states and acted for 5 years, 1776 to 1781, as the holding company for their mutually delegated powers in the international and global jurisdictions. Still in the middle of the war, the United States of America Federation formed a confederation of states in 1781 by delegating some of its powers to conduct business to a new entity, the States of America. So then we had 2 American business entities, the United States of America, a federation of states, and the States of America, a confederation of states in operation, not to include the United States. That's in a different jurisdiction. At the end of the war, the peace process held the investment companies harmless. The 3 federal constitutions adopted in 1787, 1789, and 1790, which divvied up juicy government contracts and spheres of influence, represent the implementation of 4 treaty series: the Treaty of Versailles, the land jurisdiction, the Treaty of Paris, Admiralty jurisdiction, the Treaties of Westminster, air jurisdiction, and the Treaties of Ghent, maritime jurisdiction. The American Federation doing business as the States of America was given the contract to administer the American Federal Republic under the Constitution for the United States of America of 1787. The British offshoot of the Virginia Company, called the United States of America, was given the contract to provide military and territorial government functions under the Constitution of the United States of America, 1789. The Catholic or Papist Maryland Company was given the contract to provide certain international and global services, including the post office functions under the Constitution of the United States, 1790. Under these arrangements, the American Federal Republic was responsible for most of the functions of the federal government, to include setting trade policies, building infrastructure, running federal courts, and our money, the banking. The Brits ran our Navy on the high seas and inland waterways and provided administration of our territories and possessions. The Papists provided postal and other civil services. Now, this is how the incorporated side developed during the war. The British Crown Investor Group that invested originally in the Virginia Company and which created the incorporated version of the United States of America. Remember that one who was given the contract to provide military and territorial government functions under the Constitution of 1789? So that one quickly got in trouble and overextended itself at home, in England, and abroad. So this version of the United States of America Incorporated was first bankrupted in the early 1750s, taking advantage of public bankruptcy protection to offload their commercial debts and their share of war reparations still owed to France, which had paid the recovery costs of British Crown investments, and war reparations accrued during the 30 Years' War, which ended in 1648, basically 100 years before. This bankruptcy and default on sovereign debt precipitated the war with France. The American Revolution was in part caused by European monarchs warring with each other and then expecting the colonies to bear the brunt of their sovereign debt for wars and reparations in Europe. The onerous taxes and trade tariffs and import restrictions, to say nothing of being expected to bear the entire cost of King George's French and Indian War, left the colonies staggering under the burdens and deprivations of events halfway around the world. Although we see this through the clouded lens of a deliberately obscured and distorted history that focuses primarily on the outrages perpetrated by King George and his government on the British colonies, his abuse of imposts and tariffs and taxes on goods were being passed on to all the other colonies too. Are you grasping now the political landscape here? This was all about bad business decisions. The monarchs made bad business decisions that caused them to default on their sovereign debts. They forced the colonies, aka joint venture companies, to help them fight against their creditors in the form of heavier taxation. This was legal and lawful for the monarchs to do under their laws. As a British subject or a Roman slave, you are obligated to pay their debts. The colonists decided to embrace their own sovereign power and put their foot down and say enough is enough. Isn't this a fresh perspective on the same old history that you have been taught? America, we find ourselves in the same predicament today. We have been made into British subjects and Roman slaves, obligated to pay the debts of their wars and bad business decisions. Back then, it called for a war to break free. Today, it calls for us psychologically to break free out of our Stockholm syndrome. Now, more political intrigue was brewing in the background too. It was during this unhappy period after the 7 Years' War and before the War of Independence that three other things coincided. One, the Delaware and Lenape Native nations began complaining about money they were owed as pilts, payments in lieu of taxes. And two, together with the Cherokee and Sauk nations, began objecting to trespasses against treaty agreements, with King George barring further colonial expansion beyond the Cumberland Gap. And three, perhaps worst of all, gold was found in the Great Lakes region. Even these factors are critically important to accurately assess what really was going on back then. They have been downplayed in this story about the making of our nation. The other critical factor that is downplayed in this story is this incorporation craze and how it threatened our nation's independence from the beginning, to the point that our freedom was very short-lived in reality. Let me break it down even further so we can learn where we went wrong. Remember this graphic from episodes 2 and 3 that I used to explain to you how our government was originally structured? Well, each of these blocks represents a DBA. And what does DBA mean? It means doing business as. Yes, they are all actually businesses. The first company that formed in the federal government to provide essential government services under this arrangement was the United States Trading Company, formed by a consortium of old colonial investment companies under the leadership of the Virginia Company. These mostly British companies continued to provide the 13 enumerated services stipulated in the Constitution for the United States of America, the Federal Republic, until 1863, when this first version of the United States was bankrupted by Lincoln. A few years back in 1860, the Brits ran Abraham Lincoln, an attorney who was prohibited from holding any public office in our Federal Republic, as the President of the United States of America, that is, the President of the territorial government, but not the President of the United States of America Federation, and not the President of the Federal Republic run by the States of America Federation. These actions were taken by the British monarch to position itself for a military takeover, aka coup, of our American government. It was a British territorial president, Abraham Lincoln, who strategically and illegally bankrupted our American Federal Republic business, so the British crown could usurp control over our land patents, our gold and precious metal holdings, and all the assets and contractual obligations that fell under the control and responsibility of our American Federal Republic. This is how the coup, aka military takeover, began. Once you understand these facts from this new perspective, you can understand why President Trump, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, wants to claim that our new republic, quote unquote, has been returned to the people. They want to use similar names deceit to justify claim on American assets that was originally entrusted to our American Federal Republic, which the Brits stole. The failure of our Articles of Confederation had nothing to do with it being a weak form of government, and everything to do with espionage and political intrigue. The state-of-state members of the Confederation split into two camps and fought each other, with Lincoln in control of the northern members and the territorial government, and Jefferson Davis in control of the South and his Papist allies. After this mercenary conflict, aka Civil War, the Confederation was never reconstructed and the Federal Republic abandoned, giving rise to the perpetual state of emergency we live in today. A full 1/3 of our intended government has been dormant ever since. The British territorial government slipped in what appeared to be an American military protectorate under Lincoln's Lieber Code, substituted territorial state-of-state organizations for our American Federation, and has sat here quietly leeching off us and occupying our country ever since. They have been occupying us, using our own armed forces since 1865, bleeding us dry and misdirecting our policies, engaging in warmongering for profit, and causing everyone no end of trouble for 160 plus years. It's time for it to stop, for our military to recognize what has gone on here, and for the rest of the world, including our traditional allies, to protest this continued armed occupation of America by these foreign incorporated instrumentalities. Now, the next corporate actor on the stage was the United States of America, born 1868. It took over as the service provider at the federal level in that year and published its corporate charter as a look-alike, sound-alike constitution, calling it the Constitution of the United States of America. This corporation was bankrupted and bought out by its creditors in 1907 by a consortium of mostly European banks, calling itself the Federal Reserve, which operated under the name the United States of America and the Constitution of the United States of America. You see why so much confusion here. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt bankrupted the United States of America Incorporated, and all the state-of-state franchises pledged the good faith and credit of their states and citizens thereof. Millions upon millions of Americans were falsely presumed to be acting as United States citizens and were attached as sureties responsible for paying off the debts of this private, mostly foreign-owned corporation from 1933 to 1999. Meantime, other service providers were named as successors to the service contract. And in 1944, the United States, Inc., all capital letters, fronted by the International Monetary Fund, a French-chartered international banking cartel, began operations on our shores and opened up 50 state, all capital letter, franchises. These state of Illinois, all capital letters, state of New York, all capital letters, franchises have created a multitude of CSTKV trusts named after living Americans, and also international organizations named after living Americans, and used these as means to attach and seize upon our assets, our names, our identity, our patents, our copyrights, our land, our homes, our businesses, our very bodies. We have been mischaracterized and our identities have been stolen so as to promote fraud and false claims in commerce against us. In comments made July 4, 2016 by President Obama, he expressed the hope that the Republic would finally prove to be dead. We then proved those rumors of the Republic's death to have been greatly exaggerated, with the United States Inc., all capital letters, under liquidation, and the United States of America Inc., all capital letters, under Chapter 11. The federal side of the original equity contract was vacated the year prior, leaving international trustees, i.e. the United Nations, in charge. We protested and made new arrangements for new federal service providers, establishing new sovereign letters patents, and issuing a new declaration of joint sovereignty, naming the Native American nations our international agents for the American states. This countered any claim that we were not internationally represented and also kept the original Constitution in full force and effect. England has viewed the Virginia Company as the prime mover in the War of Independence, and the aftermath of the mercenary conflict, aka Civil War, saw its chance to take its vengeance on its former colony. This amounts to the British investors who split off and created the United States of America Incorporated, trying to come back after 2 generations and glom onto the property interests of the American investors who did not incorporate, did not go bankrupt, and eventually became the unincorporated holding company known as the United States of America Unincorporated. Neither did the United States go bankrupt either. Unincorporated companies cannot file for bankruptcy protection. They operate in full commercial liability under full indemnity. The good news is that our federation, the United States of America Unincorporated Holding Company, has accepted back its delegated authority to the Confederation by operation of law and has taken on fully the operations of our federal republic. So we are returning your rightful American Federal Republic back to the people, not the President and Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. We can guarantee that 99% of Americans never conceived of the Revolutionary War as a gigantic land grab and treaty evasion. But from the safe distance of 2 centuries, it's easy to see by recognizing fact 1. King George skipped out on his treaty obligations to certain native nations, most especially the Lenape and Delawares. In fact 2, George Washington charging happily through the Cumberland Gap. In fact 3, King George funded both sides of the war. How was George Washington really involved in all this? Prior to the War of Independence, we had 2 large trading companies and their investors providing various services and trading in specific commodities, the United States Company and the United States of America Company. These international companies were the natural progeny of the original colonial investment clubs that organized throughout Europe in the 1600s to invest in colonial development. The New England Company and the Virginia Company were both originally British investment clubs. By the time of the Revolution, they had pooled together a mix of American and European investors, with the United States Company having a more continental and Catholic collection of investors, and the United States of America Company being dominated by the British and Protestant investors. When the War of Independence came along, both investment companies split down the middle, one side being pro-American independence and one side being anti-American independence. So right from the start, you have warring trade and commercial interests at the heart of the conflagration. And you have a total of 4 groups, 2 each on either side of the war: the pro-independence United States Company and the anti-independence United States Company, the pro-independence United States of America Company and the anti-independence United States of America Company. The sentiments generally expressed covered a spectrum from blind fear of losing all their American investments on one end to not caring anymore because British and Holy Roman Empire influence was killing the country's profitability anyway. After the war, George Washington was the chief shareholder in the pro-independence version of the United States of America company. So he chose to take over the presidency of the pro-independence version of the United States company to exert control over its resources, which he did not otherwise control as a shareholder. He was the 11th president of the United States company, not the first, and not the leader of the country either. That was reserved for our head of state. More miseducation we have to unlearn. So now what happened to the anti-independence versions of these clubs? Surprisingly, as private associations, they continued to conduct business as if nothing had happened. King George took over his job as Prince and Arch-Treasurer of the pro-British United States of America as part of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. And the flow of British investment dollars and influence peddling continued. They, the British Commonwealth and the post-municipal government, aka City of Rome government, aka Holy Roman Empire, worked together hand in glove for 500 years before the American War of Independence. They continued to work together during Washington's administration, during Lincoln administrations, and during the Roosevelt administration. And they still do. And religion, at least any Christian religion, had nothing to do with it at all. This was agreeable to both the British monarchs and the Pope because they had the same basic servant-master relationship for over 500 years. It was routine for the Pope to hand off the administration of his Commonwealth property and secular affairs to the British monarch. So George Washington, acting as President of the United States of America, a British Crown company, readily agreed to also act as President of the United States, a Holy Roman Empire company. And they were all cozy with that. So the office of the president, like the office of the commander-in-chief, are business offices associated with corporations and companies and have never been anything else. The convention of having the President of the United States of America company also served as the President of the United States company was convenient. Right up until very recently, when the United States Inc., all capital letters, have been liquidated in Chapter 7 bankruptcy as of October 1st, 2024, we are left wondering exactly what form of United States is Donald Trump the president of. Let me refer you back to this document from episode 1, where Donald Trump signs as Chief Executive Officer, CEO of the United States Inc., all capital letters, while also occupying the executive role of Commander-in-Chief of the British Territorial U.S. military. This is an accepted common practice of the foreign administration. During the Revolution, the deists were heavily represented among the founders who knew that King George was funding both sides of the war, that it was a sham to replace the old government with a new government in order to overturn the Treaty of the Delawares, promising there would be no colonies beyond the Appalachians, something that both the king and George Washington and company wanted to avoid keeping their word on. This is how they opened up the continent. They changed the management. By now, you have noticed that from the very first, George Washington took his oath to the United States, a commercial company, and not to any United States of America, the Confederation, and that he chose the office of president, a commercial office, not the office of the head of state of our country. The fraud, my dears, goes back to the founding. This is the American history we need reintroduced back into our public school system. We have arranged for the Native American nations to pick up the federal side of the original equity contract known as the Constitution for the United States of America of 1787. On November 4th, 2015, we issued new sovereign letters patent. And on November 6th, 2015, inclusive sovereign letters patent and a joint declaration of sovereignty together with the American, Athabascan, and Lakota Sioux nations. By so doing, we preserved our actual Constitution and chose new federal partners indigenous to this country. This was again given full due process and international notice. And what is sovereign letters patent, you ask? Sovereign letters patent are open public legal instruments issued by a monarch or head of state under the Great Seal to grant rights, titles, offices, or privileges to individuals or organizations. So for now, we have saved the Constitution for the United States of America. The foreign business partners sought to vacate the contract by entering the United States Inc., all capital letters, into bankruptcy without naming a successor to the contract. That left the federal side of the contract vacant and flapping in the wind. We formed an agreement with the American Native Nations, the Athabasca and Lakota, to fulfill the federal side. We issued 2 sets of sovereign letters patent, one to affirm the United States of America, and one to establish a new arrangement with the Native people to bring them out of their POW status and incarceration in the jurisdiction of the sea, and put them back on the land as free, sovereign, and independent people. We then sealed this agreement with a declaration of joint sovereignty, spelling out the intent of our actions. These actions were sent by registered mail to the Pope, the Queen, the UN Security Council, the United Nations Secretary General, and others. For the first time since the original Constitution was adopted, the federal side of the contract is now in the hands of Americans devoted to America, not British Federal Reserve or French International Monetary Fund interlopers. For the first time, the federal agents have a vested interest in truly and honestly protecting America and Americans. Because if they hurt or plunder us, they hurt and plunder themselves. This is how we are doing things a little bit differently this time. And now we are all going after the assets that are owed to Americans, which have been purloined by international banks and the governmental services corporations they have run as storefronts under conditions of fraud and deceit. We did all of it to circumvent the usurpers' attempts to claim ownership of our country via fraud and deceit, and to end-run their attempt to leave the actual Constitution vacated for lack of a competent federal partner. And last but not least, we did it so that you could come home from the sea to your own country and indemnify yourselves under your own organic states of the Union, which you own and control without having to go through yet another hideous, long-winded legal process. Most Native leaders simply want peace and justice and some modicum of restoration for their people to heal the damage that 6 generations of predation by this American Raj, aka British territorial US government, has wrought. However, they don't generally understand the claims of sovereignty that they make, and they don't know who the Bluecoats were, which makes for numerous lamentable misunderstandings. Sovereignty has become quite the buzzword, but few people realize that sovereignty arises as a natural consequence of self-determination, and then the process of self-governance that follows. Our individual natural sovereignty results from our gifts of unique character and conscience, and the common gifts of mobility, memory, reasoning, learning, and logic. Our group sovereignty results from people of like mind coming together in agreement to form a nation of people, asserting their sovereignty and their right to their practices, culture, language, beliefs, and laws. Our political sovereignty depends on the recognition of all the other sovereign nations respecting our right to self-govern. So there you have 3 variations and levels to sovereignty. The nation state, for example, Wisconsin, that is composed of the individual counties, and its state of the union, Wisconsin, that is composed of the entire geographical landmass as one unit, protects all the people who live in Wisconsin and guarantees to them the blessings of self-determination, an equal share of public resources, abundant freedom, and guaranteed natural rights. People of all creeds, backgrounds, colors, religions, and cultures benefit from the sovereignty of their nation state. The nation state thus embodies a larger, more inclusive and generalized political sovereignty upon which the native group sovereignty depends. This is why when we republished our Sovereign Letters patent, the sovereignty of the nation states was declared first, and the sovereignty of the dependent sovereign nations was declared second. One does not exist without the other. So the nation states are sovereign because their members are also members of nation states that are sovereign. All native groups have a joint interest in preserving the nation states as a result. And which variation of sovereignty are we speaking of here? Political sovereignty, won in battle as the victor in the War of Independence. There is also the fact that natives have guaranteed individual ownership interests in the nation states, like all other Americans, and they would lose that if they tried to take over the land and soil jurisdictions held by the nation states. Finally, there is the practical issue that 12% of the population cannot claim to rule over 88% of the population and claim ownership of all the assets that are currently shared without a huge war erupting and everyone suffering accordingly. Sharing joint sovereignty is by far the better and traditional answer. Please be aware that to the degree that Native people drift into and accept being members of a federally recognized tribe, your sovereignty is surrendered on a one-by-one basis as your people become registered as citizens of the municipal United States and receive welfare benefits from the municipal government. Those benefits can be redefined as gifts, as they should be, but otherwise, the municipal government will happily claim that Native Americans are receiving welfare benefits as dependents and that they are obligated to act as citizens of the United States as a result, with the single exception that they will not have to pay federal taxes on anything they receive. Lastly, the Bluecoats were federal U.S. government mercenaries fresh out of the Civil War. They were working for the British territorial government subcontractor under their interpretation of the Northwest Ordinance. The vicious massacres, the blankets laced with smallpox, see the earlier Pontiac Rebellion, and the worthless sea treaties were all brought to you by the British territorial government, which had already occupied this country illegally and trespassed and usurped against the American Federation of States. Please also be aware that when you are talking to us, you are not talking to the federal government. You are talking to the Federation government. We have suffered the senseless attacks of the British territorial mercenary forces the same way you have. We are natural allies and already have major alliances with large Native communities. Whatever righteous anger you feel about the past, be aware that there are plenty of other Americans who were attacked, pillaged, plundered, murdered, and forced to flee at the hands of the British territorial mercenaries, who were being paid out of the victims' own pockets to perform this service, quote unquote. There is no dearth of victims of the British-sponsored American rise, so victimhood is not a card to play. And who wants to be a victim anyway? Let us all be victors instead. We have just learned that way before the American Revolution and far away in the distant lands came to us this animal called a corporation. It has been the catalyst to the world's wars being fought and the veil that greedy men in love with money hide behind to escape commercial liability in their foreign jurisdiction. The damage has been observed and lessons learned. We are doing things differently this go round as we restore our American government. We've already got Americans serving as our federal partners and not foreigners. The next thing we need to do is nationalize all the corporations, starting with the banks first, where the greed breeds. And when I say nationalize the banks, I clearly mean that the states, the actual states of the Union, should take over the banks operating within their borders and force them to operate in a responsible and honest fashion. By agreement, the states have relaxed their borders to promote trade and transportation. And via the infamous Interstate Commerce Clause, they even authorized the federal service provider running the delegated services contract the responsibility to regulate interstate trade so as to expedite it and ensure free access to goods and services. That does not imply that the federal government has any special right to meddle with banking conducted within any state of the Union. We have 50 nation states. Banking is the business of those states. Or in international waters, it is the business of their primary association of states doing business as the unincorporated United States of America. The only banks that the Congress is supposed to be in control of are commercial banks, and they aren't doing their job. So we have chartered our own. So when I say nationalize the banks, I am saying bluntly and purely that the states need to exercise their actual statehood compacts and take over the banks within their borders, including the failed commercial banks, which are now bankrupt. This is a process called lawful conversion. Now, what happens when you lawfully convert a corporation and quote unquote nationalize it? It comes under the jurisdiction of the land. It comes under national and public law. So it comes under a different form of law. And suddenly these corporations, which have been running amok and running rampant all these years and operating in such a lawless and criminal fashion and fomenting war and war and war and more war for profit and spinning off all these groups that are labeled fascists and communists so that they can fight each other some more. All that goes away. And I can tell you right now that at the end of the day, the Americans wind up owning everything. We have it in our power to dispose of everything back to where it belongs. We have that right and we have that responsibility. Every commercial bank on this planet is bankrupt and subject to its creditors. We, the American states and people, are the paramount security interest holders and priority creditors. Those who would presume that we abandoned our assets would be making a self-interested and criminal false claim on abandonment without any sovereign power or standing to do so. When you delegate power, you retain the right to take back that power in the face of the obvious failure of those delegated to perform. At midnight, September 6, 2025, by declaration of intent and notice was served, all foreign corporations that have been operating unlawfully and in detriment to the public and private interests of the United States and its people, as a result of established gross breach of trust and criminal violation of their service contracts and operational requirements, are to be subsumed and nationalized throughout the United States and its territories and possessions. All foreign subsidiaries of these corporations are to be similarly subsumed and nationalized for cause. All monopoly interests, including those surrounding the creation and use of the Federal Reserve note as a legal tender and coercive transfer monopolies such as SWIFT system and resource monopolies of the kind like Bright, Blackstone's Real Estate Income Trust, are to be forthrightly liquidated, forfeited, or otherwise dissolved in favor of the American public interest, not the British territorial public interest. As for the Americans never paying their debts, change that to the British territorials never paying their debts and never intended to, and throughout their history have been in debt. Their use of semantic deceit and impersonation to fool the world and even many Americans into believing that they were us is all on them and their principles. The Pope, the British monarch, the Lord Mayor of the inner city of London, the Lords of the Admiralty, and all the rest of them. The Americans have been the victims of these con artists as much as everyone else and have paid our debts and even debts that were never our own, repeatedly for 6 generations. If the United States Army wants to eat, it had better start doing its job and ride herd on the operations of the bar associations. it had better honor its actual duty to protect us, our assets, our money, and our borders. There isn't going to be a United States Army anymore. No misnamed Department of Defense either, because they are not defending us. We will roll it all over, every Jeep, every tank, every airfield, hammer, and drum of oil, to the American Armed Forces. It's our army, our money, our sons and daughters, nobody else's. Any banks in collusion with them don't like it. We are nationalizing them anyway, and their assets. Now, every penny and franc goes back to the rightful owners. All the stock portfolios and bonds too. If Congress wants to continue their status quo and run its little municipal government as a Ponzi scheme against us, run up all sorts of unauthorized expenses, claim bankruptcy for themselves, and leave us holding the bag, nationalize all 185,000 municipal corporations that have been chartered under our delegated authority, nationalize all territorial corporations that have been chartered under our delegated authority, nationalize every corporate patent, trademark, service mark, font, style, land description, and time marker created under our delegated authority. And for the mega corporations, Google has ceased to have any redeeming social benefit, as it's targeting independent media and removing independent media sites from its search engine. They are just taking up bandwidth and censoring people while hiding the crimes. Time for Google and Microsoft both to be nationalized. That means we own them and we remove their current management, kick their shareholders to the curb, and basically take over the profits, patents, copyrights, trademarks, equipment, contracts, and everything else for the public good. Why not? It's the honest truth that these corporations have inflicted inestimable harm on the public. It's only right and good that the public should extract its retribution. The sooner, the better. And not just Google and Microsoft. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, too, for its role in genocide. And Pfizer, Bayer, Monsanto, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, AstraZeneca, CNN, BBC, ABC, CBC, NBC, all the alphabet suits. The United States Congress Incorporated, too. The corporations chartered by our territorial minions all belong to us and to our states of the Union. And instead of illegally trying to tax our right to buy and sell whatever we want to buy or sell, the corporations are going to come to heel and pay their share for a change. Or they will all get liquidated and their assets get nationalized. Or we will pull their charters and resell every single corporation that has functioned as an accomplice or collaborator or beneficiary of the crime against the public interest. If they want to live in a paper world and play their paper games, they are welcome to do so. But in the same token, everything they have built and everything they profit from is subject to liquidation for cause. Corporations are allowed to exist for any lawful purpose, not for any legal purpose. There's a difference. A blunt point that the lawyers and attorneys can grasp with no trouble at all. So, Mr. Fink, think carefully. GM, Raytheon, General Electric, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, Lockheed, Exxon, Elon Musk, SpaceX, you owe your existence to our sovereign power. Without us, you don't have a corporation. Betray us, and you don't have a corporation. Do anything to harm the public interest at all, including the individual best interest of our people, and you don't have a corporation. Gone, poof, like a puff of smoke in a strong wind. All incorporated entities operating on American soil are responsible for upholding and enforcing the public law, including the constitutional guarantees owed to the states and the people of this country. Failure to protect and provide for the inalienable rights as spelled out, but not limited to those enumerated as the Bill of Rights, will result in your corporation being nationalized, its assets seized, and its officers, board members, and shareholders punished. We have learned our lesson, and our states of the Union will nationalize them all. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, America. The Federation of American States has resumed operational command of the United States and has taken control of the remaining Governmental Services Corporation assets as the priority creditors and delegators as of midnight, November 21st, 2025. This is a reversionary trust and contractual obligation, a matter of law and inheritance, not politics, and has been reviewed and approved by the trustees and the International Court of Justice. For purposes of inheritance, the number of inheritors does not matter, and settlement does not preclude the existence of additional heirs. We look forward to a peaceful reintegration and restoration of respect for the federal constitutions that are all still in effect. And we remind President Donald Trump that his organization, however styled, is acting as a successor to contract with respect to the Constitution of the United States of America, and does not have our permission to interfere with domestic communication systems or cause any other undue drama or unrest within the states of the Union, while he and his administration continue their efforts to apprehend criminals and secure the borders of this country. All extraterritorial wars for profit engaged by the U.S. military are not authorized by the American government, referring to all of them since 1815, including recent wars in Iran, Venezuela, and Ukraine. Be aware that those military operations should have flown the British flag, not ours. In respect to the current mercenary conflict against Iran, they are moonlighting under a separate private contract with Britain, Germany, and Israel. The Union Jack flag should be flown, not the stars and stripes. Take notice, all jurisdictions, all nations, all people, all countries, all principalities and potentates and presidents and prime ministers. See our formal joint declaration with the Lakota Sioux Nation in the description below. Go to the claimyourinheritance.info website and contact your local state assembly and correct the record and declare your identity as an American. Then join us in all this work we have to do to get America back on track. In this episode, I wanted to share with you some of the American history that is missing in our public schools, and that which is taught offer a different perspective. I'm sure I did. I welcome your questions and comments as always. Until next time, thank you for watching the Resurgence Post Report.